So what this means is, how do we now take these concepts and apply it to ESD? Do we need to, number one, do we need to improve the size of your engine? No. Your engine is big enough to run a sprint triathlon, make no mistake. Number two, let's look at the gears that you need to do that. Make sense?
Absolutely.
So, if you're at home watching this, or you now, Hayley, you're going to have a piece of paper in front of you with a pen, and I want you to have 3 columns on it.
Okay.
Column 1 is the range for heart rate reserve that you're going to work at.
Okay.
Column 2 is the correlating VO2 percentage that you'll be working at. And column 3 is the basic outcomes to that gear. Example number 1. 50 to 60% of your maximum heart rate reserve. And remember, heart rate reserve is 220 minus your age, minus your resting heart rate. Times it by the percentage, add your resting heart rate back on. It's a lot more accurate and a lot more effective than just heart rate max 220 minus your age.
Gotcha.
50 to 60% correlates to about 20 to 35% of your VO2 max. 50 to 60% of your maximum heart rate reserve correlates to about 20 to 35% of your VO2 max. The basic outcome to this, think of it this way, this is your first gear. It's almost indefinite movement. This is the definition of endurance. You won't run out of gas at this gear. You know? You
right.
won't. I mean, unless you did more than 3,000 minutes of continuous exercise, it's unlikely you're going to start running out of gas. Okay?
Okay.
Gear 2, 60 to 70% of your max heart rate reserve, 36 to 52% of your VO2. 36 to 52% of VO2. This is, again, aerobic. But here's what's interesting. You get about 45 to 60 minutes of continuous movement, maybe up to 90 minutes, and it's primarily aerobic in nature. Okay?
Okay.
Gear 3, 70 to 80% of maximum heart rate reserve, 52 to 68% VO2. This is a huge gear for everyone and for you, which we're going to discuss. Aerobic and anaerobic. You get about 30 to 45 minutes of gas. Typically, the predominant pathway for people in events like 10K. Okay?
Okay.
30 to 45 minutes of continuous exercise, but a slightly higher gear. It's not gear 1, it's gear 3. Aerobic and anaerobic. Gear 4, 80 to 90% of maximum heart rate reserve. You've got about 68 to 83% of VO2 max. Anaerobic. You're in gear 4, you're anaerobic now. You've got about 10 to 20 minutes in this gear. You're going to see why this is a massive gear for you in a minute. The world is going to see why this is a massive gear for you when we post it everywhere. This is typically, say, a 5K runner. And I'm just using running. It could be any sport with similar energy demands, right? Gear 5, 90 to 100% of max heart rate reserve, 83 to 100% VO2 max, pure anaerobic. You got 1 to 5 minutes in this gear. Okay, so can you see how there's five cogs, 5 gears?
Yeah.
5 heart rate reserves, 5 correlating VO2s, and 5 basic outcomes. What pathway and roughly how much gas time do I use? What kind of gas and how long do I have it for? So simple, huh? It doesn't sound complicated.
Right.
We don't apply this to our training. People just don't apply this to their training.
Right.
So when I looked at your wonderful online data, not just your VO2 and your anaerobic threshold, I also looked at all the data from a heart rate monitor. Well done on using that, because without it, you've got no idea what you're doing. You've uploaded it. I can see your runs, your bikes, everything. I did a quick analysis of like 3 weeks worth of your training. Just randomly picked 3 weeks. I found that you live in 2 gears 90% of the time. Regardless of whether it was a 20-minute run or an hour run, a sprint on a bike or a steady state on a bike, you lived in 2 gears. Have a guess what gears you live in.
4 and 5.
So you knew then. If I ask you what gears 4 and 5, what energy systems are you primarily using? What are you going to tell me?
My anaerobic energy system, so I'm gonna run.
How much gas time do you have?
I'm gonna run out.
You're going to run out. Here's why it's important. When I look at your Olympic sprint triathlon, sorry, your sprint distance triathlon, 3/4 of a mile swim, 20k bike, 5k run. Based on what you've been doing and what you've been telling me, you're looking at 15 to 20 minutes for a swim. You're looking at 48, 52 minutes for a bike ride. And you're looking at 25 to 30 minutes of a run. Put that together, you've got on average about 100 minutes in heat in Vegas, right?
Yeah.
100 minutes is 1 hour and 40 minutes. So we know straight off the bat, you've got an hour and 40 minutes of work to do. You've got 5 gears to do it in. You're currently training gears 4 and 5. Combined, you may have about 25 minutes of gas. What are you going to do with another hour and 15 minutes?
I'm gonna burn out.
You see how simple this is?
Yeah, totally.
The number one gear you're lacking is gear 2 and a little bit of gear 3. Yes, that's an interval, but it's not a true interval. You would want to come back to 60, 65%. What gear would that be? If you was at 65% recovery during an interval sprint, what gear would you be using?
A 65% of heart rate is what you're referring to?
Yeah.
2.
What would be the gas you use for gear 2?
I'm aerobic.
Aerobic. How much gas time do you have?
I got 45 to 60 minutes, man.
That might fill the rest of the race that you're going to need to fill when gears 4 and 5 run out of gas.
Mm-hmm.
This is how simple energy system development is. Now, it gets more complex when you look at what's the level you want to compete at, how hard you want to run, of course, but in the simplest version, I can look at your data and say, you've got a really good size engine. One thing that jumped out is your anaerobic threshold kicks in at around 60%. At 60% of your VO2, right? If you go to my chart that I gave you, 60% of your VO2 correlates to what percentage of heart rate?
That would be 70 to 80%.
So when you get to 70 or 80%, you start going anaerobic, right?
Right.
And what did I tell you? That's gear 3, by the way. What energy pathways do you use in gear 3?
I'm using aerobic and anaerobic.
How much total gas time do you get?
30 to 45 minutes.
If I look at your data, what's an average time that you train for when you run and bike and swim?
30 to 45 minutes.
So you at best are doing some zone 3, but you're really doing zone 4 and 5. You're missing the first 2 gears. And regardless of what level of intensity you want to feel you're training at, or you want to feel when you compete, you don't have enough time to only live in gears 3, 4 and 5. We need to get some gears 1 and 2. Your limiting factor is not your anaerobic capacity. Your limiting factor is indeed your aerobic capacity.
Yeah.
What do you think my biggest fear is, looking at the fact that you only live with the cogs 4 and 5?
Well, I'm going to run out of gas. I'm going to overtrain.
You're overtrained as well. So, here's what this means. Remember, the first thing is what's VO2, what's anaerobic. We've discussed that. Size of tank. It's where your gears change from primarily aerobic to anaerobic. We want to shift it to the right. Guess what? 4 weeks out, we don't have time to shift it to the right. The red flag is, how do I make sure you got enough gas on race day and that you don't burn out or overtrain before you even get to race day? That's where we live. Second thing we said was, how does these things affect ESD? There's 5 gears. Each one has a heart rate, a VO2 and an outcome. We just told you what they were. We now know where you live, what you're not doing. Last thing we want to talk about is, so what can we do for your training right now to get you effective performance and not overtrain you?